Zik Snorp oozed his way into the locker room, his gelatinous form pulsing with both dread and anticipation. Another day, another grueling round of galactic fitness training. He slid over to his locker, using a tentacle to deftly spin the combination lock. With practiced ease, he started to extrude his gym clothes from his semi-solid body. It was a unique skill he'd mastered as a sentient blob. Just then, his friend Glup bobbed up beside him, his eye stalks wiggling with excitement. "Guess what?" he gurgled, his whole body wobbling. "We're getting a new student today." Zix's nucleus flickered with curiosity. "Oh, who is it? A human?" Glup squeaked, quivering from his core to his outer membrane. Zix froze mid-gym shorts extrusion, his surface color shifting from its usual lime green to an uneasy yellow. "Wait, a human? From that infamous death planet, Earth?" "That's right," Glup burbled, clearly delighted. "It's true." Zix's whole form drooped. "Humans aren't supposed to study here. They're Deathworlders." Another voice slithered into the conversation, thick with contempt. Blobker, the locker room bully, loomed over them, his substantial body oozing with derision. "Disgusting species," he sneered. "I heard they have solid bones inside them." A wave of revulsion rippled through the room. The very idea was horrifying. "I heard they consume toxins for pleasure," whispered Squish, an amoeba-like creature, as if sharing some dark secret. "I heard they expose themselves to radiation on purpose to change their skin color," added Slime, his antennae twitching. Zix's anxiety began to surge. Humans were known for their bizarre survival skills and physical endurance. Just existing on Earth meant surviving conditions that would count as extreme in most parts of the galaxy. Simple acts like walking or lifting would be considered perilous sports elsewhere. And running, Zix shuddered at the thought. Suddenly, the locker room door swung open with a thunderous crash, and every alien recoiled in alarm. Standing in the doorway, backlit ominously, was the human. "Hey there," he called out with a cheerful wave. "I'm Jake. Nice to meet you." Zix stared, paralyzed by horror. Jake's body was a nightmare of sinew and bone, clad in a thin layer of skin that did little to hide the terrifying power beneath. His face was stretched in a peculiar expression, wide-eyed, with his mouth pulled back to reveal rows of unervingly pale teeth. And, "Glob have mercy," his arms moved independently from his torso. Jake looked around, his grin fading as he noticed the fearful expressions on his new classmates' faces. Is everything okay here?" Blobker, eager to assert his authority, oozed forward menacingly. "Listen up, human. We don't want any trouble from your kind. Just stay out of our way," Blobker grumbled. Jake's face lit up with excitement. "Oh wow, you must be a Varaxian slime beast. I've read all about your species. Can you actually shift your body density at will?" "That's incredible." Blobker hesitated, taken aback by the human's enthusiasm. Well, yes, I can, but that's amazing," Jake said, sounding genuinely impressed. "You guys are the ultimate survivors. Maybe you could show me some tricks. I'm still figuring out how things work here." Blobker's gelatinous mass wobbled with bewilderment. This wasn't the reaction he'd expected. Where was the panic, the pleas for mercy, the glorious intimidation he usually inspired? Before he could respond, the sharp blast of a whistle cut through the locker room. "All right, you blobs and blobs to be," boomed the voice of Coach Zorbach. "Get your various appendages and orifices out here and line up." With wary glances toward Jake, the alien students began to slink, squelch, and glide toward the gymnasium. Zix Snorp found himself lagging at the back, his anxiety levels spiking as he watched Jake's limbs carry him forward in long, confident strides. Once inside the gym, Zix's worst fears were realized. Glowing holographic letters flashed across the hollow board at the front of the room. "Obstacle course." A unified groan of dismay arose from the group. Obstacle courses were universally dreaded, full of climbing, squeezing, and, worst of all, real physical effort. Zix felt his primal aversion to movement begin to kick in. Coach Zorbach, a writhing collection of tentacles shaped vaguely like a person, gestured toward the daunting array of equipment laid out before them. "Listen up, all you under-evolved wads of goo. Today, we're putting you to the test, and I don't just mean that figuratively. Unlike last week when Gloop split into 16 pieces trying to lift the dark matter dumbbells, Gloop's scattered parts glowed a faint shade of embarrassment. First, you'll take on the anti-grav hurdles," Coach Zorbach continued. "After that, it's the quantum foam pit followed by the tractor beam tightrope. Then you'll face the Schwarzschild swing, and we'll wrap up with the neutron star bench press. Any questions?" A chaotic wave of limbs, pseudopods, and other alien extremities waved in the air. "No? Perfect," Coach Zorbach said, ignoring them all. "And since we have a new recruit today, I think it's only fitting that he demonstrates the course. Jake, you're up." Jake stepped forward, determination etched across his face. Every alien eye, or equivalent sensory organ, was fixed on him with horrified fascination. Surely, they thought, there was no way a creature from a planet as tame as Earth could handle these grueling tests designed for beings from the most extreme habitats across the galaxy. Jake approached the first challenge, the anti-grav hurdles. These weren't standard hurdles by any means. They flickered in and out of existence at unpredictable intervals thanks to quantum lock technology. Most students spent ages just trying to calculate when and where the hurdles would appear. Jake, however, showed no signs of hesitation. He took a steadying breath, crouched low into a bizarre stance that made Zix Snorp's nucleus twist in discomfort, and then he was off. He moved like some unstoppable force, his powerful legs propelling him forward with astonishing momentum. As he approached the first hurdle, which blinked into existence just in time, he vaulted over it with ease, twisting his body midair to dodge another hurdle that materialized above him. The alien students looked on in wide-eyed or wide pseudopod astonishment as Jake maneuvered through the anti-grav hurdles with an uncanny mixture of speed and agility. Did you see that? Glup gurgled, his eye stalks nearly tangling as he struggled to follow Jake's movements. Unbelievable, Blobker muttered, his gelatinous form wobbling with a strange mix of apprehension and reluctant admiration. But Jake wasn't finished yet. He faced the quantum foam pit next, a swirling vortex of subatomic particles capable of scrambling anyone's molecules if they weren't cautious. Most students would tiptoe through it, cautiously testing each step, fearing they'd end up as a scattered cloud of particles. Jake apparently had a different approach in mind. He took a few steps back, dashed forward, and astonishingly, leapt. The alien students collectively gasped as he soared over the entire foam pit in one fluid motion, landing on the other side with a precise roll before standing up with an easy smile. Is that even allowed? Squish asked, her voice quivering. Coach Zorbaka's tentacles rippled with what could only be described as alien enthusiasm. I'll allow it. Jake was already onto the next obstacle, the tractor beam tightrope. This challenge involved navigating a suspended gravitational field that simulated walking on a hair-thin line, with the added thrill of unpredictable gravitational shifts. It required perfect balance and spatial awareness, both of which seemed to be second nature to Jake. He stepped onto the tightrope with a casual ease that would have been more fitting for a stroll through a garden. As the gravitational fields fluctuated around him, Jake adjusted himself with tiny, almost imperceptible shifts in his posture, gliding across with practiced confidence. He even managed a quick wave at his awestruck classmates along the way. He's actually enjoying this, Zix Snorp whispered, his anxiety mounting as he watched Jake effortlessly master the challenges. The final trial loomed, the Schwarzschild radius swing. This daunting contraption swung a miniature black hole at regular intervals, requiring participants to perfectly time their moves to avoid being stretched thin by gravitational forces. Jake took a long look at the black hole's swing pattern, his gaze sharpening. Then, as the pendulum reached its highest point, he dashed forward. The alien students collectively held their breaths, or performed the equivalent in their species-specific ways, as Jake launched himself toward what seemed like an inevitable disaster. Time seemed to slow as his body arched through the air, headed straight toward the daunting, gravitationally intense obstacle. Jake twisted mid-flight, contorting his body in a way that made Zix Snorp's non-existent stomach do flips. For a breath-stopping moment, it looked like he'd miscalculated his jump, but then, with a final twist that seemed to disregard every known law of physics, he slid through an impossibly narrow gap near the black hole's event horizon. He landed on the other side with a triumphant yell, his hair slightly frazzled from the close brush with intense space-time curvature. Did you all see that? Jake called out, his face glowing with both effort and exhilaration. The gravitational lensing was insane. It felt like I was riding a wave of warped space-time. The alien students could only stare, stunned. Not only was this human taking on the toughest challenges Galactic High could throw at him, but he was actually enjoying it. And yet, one last challenge remained, the neutron star bench press. This wasn't a simple weightlifting test. It involved a fragment of neutron star material compressed to unimaginable density. Most students could barely shift the bar, let alone lift it fully. Jake stepped up to the bench, giving the bar an appraising look that held equal parts caution and excitement. Now this is what I call a challenge, he murmured, cracking his knuckles in a way that made a few of his classmates flinch. Settling onto the bench, he took hold of the bar and began to lift. The veins in his arms stood out, his face flushed as he strained, and for a moment, it seemed as though the human might finally meet his match. But then, with a growl that reverberated through the entire room, Jake pushed the bar upward. Bit by bit, the neutron star fragment rose as he pressed. His arms shook from the effort, his teeth clenched in pure determination. Come on, human, show us what you're made of, Coach Zorbak bellowed, his tentacles writhing in excitement. With one last burst of effort, Jake extended his arms fully, holding the weight high above him in victory. A chorus of alien cheers, whistles, and various sounds of awe filled the gym. Jake carefully lowered the weight back onto the rack and sat up, breathing hard. He looked around at his classmates, a big grin spreading across his face. "So how'd I do?" he asked, almost shyly. Coach Zorbach slithered over, his tentacles practically vibrating with excitement. "How'd you do? I've never seen anything like it in all my years. You're a born athlete, kid." Jake scratched the back of his neck, blushing. "Ah, thanks, coach. But honestly, this was pretty tame compared to some of the obstacle courses we do back on Earth. You should see the stuff on our elementary school playgrounds." A horrified silence swept through the gym. "You mean," Glup asked, his voice wobbling, "you do this sort of thing, just for fun?" Jake nodded eagerly. "Oh yeah, obstacle courses are big on Earth. We've got things like Tough Mudder, Spartan Races, Ninja Warrior. You'd love it. It's all about testing your limits and seeing what you're made of." The alien students exchanged stunned glances, utterly bewildered by the idea that a species could consider such feats fun. The alien students exchanged looks of sheer horror. The idea of willingly putting oneself through such physical exertion was completely baffling. "But why?" Zix Snorp finally asked, his fear briefly overtaken by morbid curiosity. Jake paused to think. "I guess because it feels incredible. There's something so satisfying about pushing yourself, breaking through limits, and achieving things you thought you couldn't. Plus, you get an endorphin rush." "Endorphin rush?" Blobker asked, his gelatinous body quivering in confusion. "Yeah, you know, like a runner's high, a wave of happiness after intense exercise," Jake explained, but the blank stares made it clear that they had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. Then Jake's eyes sparkled with an idea. "Hey, what if I teach you guys some basic exercises? Nothing too intense, just some simple moves to get your fluids moving, or whatever you've got instead of blood." The aliens recoiled at the suggestion, but before they could protest, Coach Zorbach's tentacles were already guiding them into position. "Brilliant idea, Jake," the coach announced enthusiastically. "These protoplasmic pupils could use a dose of real physical education." And so began the most grueling hour of Zix Snorp's short life. With the boundless enthusiasm of a cartoon character on a sugar high, Jake led the class through a series of exercises that seemed custom designed to defy all laws of biology, physics, and basic decency. They started with an exercise Jake called jumping jacks. The alien students watched in horrified fascination as Jake demonstrated, his arms and legs moving independently in a series of coordinated motions that looked less like exercise and more like an out-of-control starship engine. "Okay, everyone, let's try 20 reps, Jake said brightly. Zix Snorp glanced down at his gelatinous form and back up at Jake. He had no arms, no legs, and the very concept of jumping was as foreign to him as underwater breathing was to a vacuum. Nevertheless, he tried his best, rippling his body in what he hoped was a reasonable imitation of Jake's movement. Around him, his classmates were making similar attempts at exercise. Glup had divided into 4 smaller glups, each one bouncing up and down as though trying to replicate the concept of jumping. Blobker was shifting his mass back and forth between pseudopods, looking less like he was exercising and more like he was experiencing some sort of gelatinous malfunction. Squish had given up entirely and rolled himself into a sphere, rolling back and forth in a vague attempt at participation. Jake, for his part, stayed upbeat and encouraging. "Awesome effort, everyone. Remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about giving it your best." Next up was an exercise Jake called push-ups, which seemed to involve lowering the body to the floor and then pushing it back up using only one's arms. For beings adapted to low-gravity environments and entirely lacking in anything like arms, this was a uniquely cruel form of torment. Zix Snorp watched with a mix of horrified admiration as Jake effortlessly demonstrated, his muscular arms powering his solid frame up and down with ease. When it was the class's turn to attempt the exercise, absolute chaos erupted. Flattening himself against the gym floor, Zix Snorp tried to lift his gelatinous form using, well, he wasn't quite sure what. He managed to form a small bulge in his midsection, raising a fraction of his mass barely a millimeter before collapsing back into a quivering puddle. His classmates didn't fare much better. Glup had somehow contorted himself into a knot trying to mimic Jake's movements. Blobker was repeatedly extending and retracting a pseudopod, resembling someone trying to high-five the floor rather than do push-ups. Squish had abandoned the task altogether, lying spread out on the floor in an unconvincing imitation of a gym mat. Yet Jake stayed impossibly upbeat. "That's the spirit, everyone. Feel the burn," or whatever it is your species experiences. Cellular discomfort, a bit of mitochondrial unease. As the exercise session dragged on, Zix Snorp found himself somewhat impressed impressed by Jake's endless patience and energy. Despite the fact that none of them could manage anything close to a proper push-up, Jake never stopped offering his support. "Alright, let's change things up a bit," Jake finally announced, after what felt like an eternity of failed push-ups. "Let's try some yoga." A collective groan rippled through the class, though whether from relief or apprehension was anyone's guess. Jake moved into a series of poses that defied both reason and anatomy, twisting his body into shapes that made Zick Snorp's nucleus ache just watching. "This one's called the downward-facing dog," Jake explained, folding himself so that his hands and feet touched the floor, creating an inverted V-shape. Zick Snorp stared in confusion. The pose seemed to require a solid internal framework, recognizable limbs, and a complete disregard for dignity, none of which he possessed. Still, he gave it a try. He squished himself into a rough triangle, extending his pseudopods to form what could, with extreme generosity, be called limbs. Around him, his classmates were struggling with equally creative interpretations. Glup had molded himself into a wobbly pyramid shape, though his eye stalk continually slid downward, pooling on the floor. Blobker had spread himself out like a gelatinous pancake, bubbling occasionally in what might have been an attempt at controlled breathing. In a burst of creativity, Squish had managed to shape himself into a nearly perfect canine silhouette, though he was facing decidedly upward rather than downward. Jake, as always, was encouraging. "Awesome effort, everyone. Remember, yoga is about connecting with your body and finding balance." Zick Snorp wasn't entirely sure if he even had a center, unless Jake meant his nucleus, but he continued on gamely. As they progressed through increasingly outlandish poses, the warrior, the tree, the crow, Zick Snorp began to experience an unexpected sensation. At first, he thought it might be cellular breakdown, but as he wobbled his way through a barely stable version of the chair pose, he realized it was something quite different. He felt good. His cytoplasm flowed more smoothly, his organelles operated more efficiently, and a pleasant sense of well-being washed over his entire gelatinous form. Was this the endorphin rush Jake had mentioned? Glancing around, Zick Snorp realized he wasn't the only one discovering this new sensation. Glup's sections pulsed with a healthy, bright glow. Blobker's usual scowl had softened into an expression of surprised satisfaction. Even Squish seemed energized, his normally hesitant pseudopods reaching out with uncharacteristic confidence. When the class finally came to an end, the alien students found themselves in an unusual state of euphoria. They were tired, certainly, but it was a satisfying, earned exhaustion, the result of real effort. Jake, who seemed barely winded, smiled broadly at the group. "Fantastic job, everyone. You were all amazing. How are you feeling?" A pause filled the room as the students processed the question. Then, to everyone's surprise, Blobker spoke up first. I feel strong," he admitted, his gelatinous form shimmering with something like wonder. "Like I could ooze up a wall or engulf something twice my size." A murmur of agreement bubbled through the class. Glup bounced excitedly, his parts vibrating in sync. Squish seemed larger than usual, his form puffed up with newfound confidence. Even Zick Snorp found himself nodding. "It's not unbearable," he mumbled, which for him was high praise. Jake's grin grew even wider. "See, I told you exercise could be fun, and this is just the start. Wait until we try team sports." Excitement rippled through the class, quickly followed by a flicker of alarm as they imagined what Jake's idea of team sports might involve. Coach Zorbach slithered up, his tentacles quivering with enthusiasm. "Incredible work, Jake. I haven't seen this group so motivated since the field trip to the black hole where half of you nearly got spaghettified." The coach turned to the class, his booming voice filled with new energy. "All right, you gooey sacks of potential. I hope you're ready because from now on, we're following Jake's lead. I want to see you oozing, slithering, and undulating with purpose. We're going to whip you protoplasmic disappointments into shape if it's the last thing we do." Coach Zorbach bellowed. A mix of groans and enthusiastic gurgles rippled through the class. Zick Snorp felt a curious combination of dread and anticipation stirring in his cytoplasm. He glanced over at Jake, who shot him an encouraging thumbs up. As they made their way back to the locker room, Zick Snorp sidled up to Jake. "So, is this really what you humans do all the time?" he asked, his tone equal parts amazement and disbelief. Jake laughed. "Well, not every human is into fitness like I am, but yeah, physical activity is a huge part of our culture. It's not just about staying fit, it's about challenging yourself, pushing your limits, you know." Zick Snorp didn't quite understand, not fully. The idea of voluntarily exerting oneself still seemed absurd. And yet, he couldn't deny the odd sense of achievement stirring within him. For the first time, his body felt less like a gelatinous prison for his mind and more like something he could shape and improve. "Do you think," Zick Snorp began, hesitant, "do you think you could show me more? Like, maybe exercises that suit my particular physiology?" Jake's face lit up like a supernova. "Absolutely, I'd love to. We could start with resistance training to boost your pseudopod strength, maybe flexibility exercises to improve your shapeshifting. Oh, and we could come up with a cardio routine that works with your unique circulatory setup." As Jake rattled off ideas for fitness plans and goals, Zick Snorp felt something stir within him, a sensation so rare it took him a moment to recognize it. It was hope that maybe, just maybe, he could become more than a quivering blob of space jelly. Around him, it seemed his classmates were having similar realizations. Glup was eagerly asking Jake about exercises to control his mitosis. Blobker was curious about weight training techniques suited to amorphous beings. Even Squish, usually shy, was inquiring about exercises to build confidence. Reaching the locker room, Zick Snorp realized everything had shifted. The terrifying Deathworlder they'd feared that morning had, in the course of one gym class, become something else entirely. Jake wasn't a monster. They now saw him as a friend, a mentor, a guide to an entirely new way of being. As Zix watched Jake chatting animatedly with the other aliens, his hands moving in excited gestures as he explained some new exercise technique, he felt, for the first time, that he'd found a true companion. In that moment, Zix Snorp had a sudden, profound realization. The most alien thing in the room wasn't the human with his strange, rigid skeleton and independent limbs. It was the idea he represented. The notion that one could transform their destiny through sheer determination and a considerable amount of effort. As he began to extrude his regular clothes from his lower dermis, Zix Snorp felt a sense of excitement about the next gym class, a feeling that would have been unimaginable just hours ago. He stole one last glance at Jake, marveling at the bizarre twist of fate that had brought this human into their lives. Who knew? Maybe, just maybe, they'd all become Deathworlders in their own way one day. Zix Snorp could picture himself now, conquering obstacle courses, bench-pressing neutron stars, running marathons across planets. The thought made him chuckle, a sound that escaped as a series of amused bubbles. One thing was certain, gym class would never be the same again, and neither would they. As Zix Snorp slithered out of the locker room, he felt like he was gliding into an entirely new phase of existence. Who would have thought that the key to unlocking his potential had been within him all along, hidden in his very protoplasm, simply waiting for a human to reveal it? The universe, it seemed, had a curious sense of humor. But then again, when you're a blob of sentient goo learning fitness from a Deathworlder, you begin to appreciate life's little ironies. As the day ended and the students of Galactic High drifted off in their various directions, there was a renewed spring in their slithers, an energized pulse in their cell membranes. They had faced the strange phenomenon of human fitness and had not only survived, they'd embraced it. And as for Jake, he left the school with a bounce in his step and a grin on his face, already thinking up tomorrow's lesson. Who knew teaching gym to a bunch of alien blobs could be so satisfying? He had a feeling this was just the beginning of a weird and wonderful friendship. In the weeks following Jake's arrival at Galactic High, a subtle but undeniable change took place. It began as a small ripple in the vast interstellar world of education, but soon grew into a wave that was reshaping alien society itself. Zix Snorp found himself surprisingly at the center of this movement. Normally one to fade into the background, quite literally, thanks to his chameleon-like abilities, Zix now found himself leading a kind of revolution. It all began rather innocently. The day after that game-changing gym class, Zix Snorp decided to try some of Jake's exercises in the privacy of his own dwelling pod. He squished himself into something that vaguely resembled a push-up position and began a rhythmic undulating motion. His pod mate, a gaseous entity named Whiff, observed with growing curiosity. "What in the great nebula's name are you doing?" Whiff asked, his voice a gentle, musical hiss of released gas. Zix Snorp paused, a wave of embarrassment bubbling through his cytoplasm. But he remembered Jake's words about embracing challenges and pushing limits. "It's called exercise," he replied proudly. "The human student showed us. Want to give it a try?" To his surprise, Whiff agreed. Soon, the two were engaged in what could generously be called a workout routine. Whiff's version of jumping jacks involved involved rapidly expanding and contracting his gaseous form. While Zix attempted various gelatinous contortions he hoped resembled yoga poses. Word of this new activity quickly spread throughout the binary star system that housed Galactic High. Alien students from all corners of the cosmos started to take an interest in this strange human ritual called physical fitness. Even Blobker, to everyone's astonishment, became one of Jake's most committed followers. The former bully was often spotted in the school's anti-gravity chamber, lifting increasingly heavy chunks of dark matter. His once amorphous form began to develop what could almost be described as muscles, if muscles were made of semi-sentient goo. Glup embraced the new fitness craze with his usual enthusiasm. He invented a workout routine that involved repeatedly dividing and recombining his cellular structure. "It's like interval training," he explained to a very impressed Jake. But at the molecular level, even Squish, usually shy and uncertain, found his place in the fitness world. With Jake's patient guidance, he discovered a talent for what humans called yoga. Thanks to his flexible, amorphous body, Squish was able to twist into poses that would make even the most advanced human yogi envious. And it wasn't just the students who changed. Inspired by Jake's example, Coach Zorbach completely overhauled the physical education program. Quantum foam dodgeball and neutron star shot put were replaced with a diverse curriculum aimed at challenging and enhancing the strengths of students of every species and physical composition. "Remember," Coach Zorbach would roar, his tentacles quivering with passion, "there's no such thing as an unathletic species, only untapped potential." Soon, the effects rippled beyond the school. Parents began to notice their children returning home with newfound energy and confidence. Some even reported improved academic performance, as if the physical activity had sharpened their minds. Zix Snorp's own parental units were skeptical at first. "You willingly subject yourself to physical strain," his maternal unit asked, her gelatinous form quivering with concern. "Are you certain this human isn't some kind of interstellar sadist?" But as they observed the positive changes in their offspring, their worries melted away like space ice on a blazing death world. Soon, Zix found himself leading family workout sessions, with his progenitors joining in enthusiastically despite their initial reservations. The fitness craze spread beyond Galactic High, reaching neighboring star systems like a benevolent strain of space flu. Fitness centers began opening on space stations and planetary outposts, while HoloNet channels dedicated to xenomorphic aerobics became wildly popular. Watching this unfold, Jake felt a mixture of pride and amusement. He'd come to Galactic High hoping to learn about alien cultures and maybe make a few friends. He never imagined he'd start an interstellar fitness movement. He said to Zix Snorp one day as they watched a group of Jovian gas giants attempt a surprisingly elegant ballet routine, "Back on Earth, we have a saying, be the change you want to see in the world. I guess sometimes that change can be as simple as doing a few push-ups." Zix rippled in agreement, his gelatinous form now showing hints of muscle definition. "I never thought I'd say this," he admitted, "but I'm glad you Deathworlders joined Galactic Society. You humans may be terrifying, but you're also kind of incredible." Jake grinned, reaching out to give Zix a friendly punch on the arm, though his fist sank harmlessly into Zix's gelatinous body with a soft squelch. Both burst out laughing, their laughter echoing through the halls of Galactic High, blending with the grunts, squeaks, and burbles of aliens engaged in all manner of physical activities. One thing was certain, the galaxy would never be the same again. And maybe, just maybe, that was a good thing. After all, in the grand cosmic gym of the universe, everyone deserves the chance to flex their tentacles, pseudopods, or whatever appendages they happen to have. Sometimes, it just takes a fearless human from a death world to show them how.